to this handsome hunka.
Alright, so first of all, this is not the normal type of video I make. I normally don't like to focus on just one movie, especially not a new release, but when I went and saw Joker 2 the other day, I knew about halfway through that I'd have to talk about it. But first of all, I want to begin sharing my thoughts on Joker 2 and kind of the point of it, and I think also the problem of it, by referencing a video from a few years ago, which was made by a really great channel called Films and Stuff. And this video was titled Jurassic World, the Cynical Blockbuster. And in this video, Films and Stuff basically makes the case that Jurassic World is a film which is aware of its own existence, and the commentary of the park, as in the Jurassic Park, is in a way a commentary on itself and on legacy soft reboot blockbuster sequels.
At their core, these are films and filmmakers wrestling with their legacies, identifying the good and bad elements of their past, and trying to find a new way to make them compelling. But there is one blockbuster that points out the flaws in its genre, only to indulge in the worst tropes and ideas in the series thus far. A blockbuster that is aware of the issues that plague its series, but then doubles down on these issues going forward.
And I actually think that he's right about this, and Jurassic World is, I think, it's one of my favorite Jurassic Park films. Now the two sequels, of course, but Jurassic World I do think has something to say, and interestingly it has something to say about itself. And yes, I feel like what it's saying is somewhat cynical, both about its own existence and the existence of Hollywood sequels. However, Jurassic World is not nearly as cynical of a blockbuster as Joker, Folie à Deux. The only films that I can really compare Joker, Folie à Deux to are like Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice and Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi. First of all three films are big blockbuster sequels. They're tentpole films. Two of them are Warner Brothers films, two of them are DC films, but all three of them are films which were extremely divisive upon release, if not basically universally hated, and yet all three films sort of build their basic premises off of deconstructing the basic principles of their source material. So for BVS and Joker, it's the comics, and also prior film adaptations, and for The Last Jedi, it's just Star Wars as a whole. All three films sort of try to pick apart the mythos of their own franchises, and all three of these films do so different ways. But what all three films have in common is that they really pissed people off. As I'll cover later in this video, I'm not saying that movies which are trying to deconstruct franchises automatically get a pass because fanboys are angry. They don't. I think that Batman vs. Superman especially has just basic filmmaking flaws. I think The Last Jedi has basic filmmaking flaws, and I think the Joker, Folie à Deux has basic filmmaking flaws. But I do think that some of the ire pointed towards these three films, especially towards Joker and The Last Jedi, are sort of in bad faith and are largely, in a way, kind of missing the wider point of these movies. I also think that in a few years we're going to be seeing a lot of YouTube videos with like red circles and arrows in the thumbnails with titles like I was wrong about Joker 2, or what you missed in Joker 2, or Joker 2 a reappraisal. And also just, things come and go in cycles. What was old and sucked before becomes cool and popular again. Like, that's especially the status quo with superhero and comic book movies right now. And first of all, I think that one thing that was working against this film was a bit of hypocrisy on the part of comic book and superhero fans. Big surprise, I know. But specifically that fans are always clamoring. They're always saying, we want something different. Give us a different superhero movie. Do something unique. And Todd Phillips does something unique, and everybody says, that sucked. We hate that. No. Do it like the first movie. So it's just a lose-lose situation. This has been known. Like, you're never going to please everyone. In fact, these days you can hardly seem to please anyone. Not that gives the movie a pass, but I just do think it is an interesting indicator of where we are right now as a fandom, and also where audiences are. Now, to be upfront, like I said, I do think this movie has flaws. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I don't want this to just be like a review. You can watch like Chris Stuckman or Jeremy Johns if you want a basic review. But the biggest issue with Joker, Folie à Deux is the pacing. This movie has terrible pacing. It feels like it goes on forever. Anytime tension does start to actually build, it's interrupted by a musical sequence, and a musical sequence which is not particularly good either. And part of the idea is that the musical sequences aren't supposed to be good because they're a reflection of a diseased mind, which is creating a fantasy to make itself feel better about its poor actions. That's fine, I get that. I still think you could do that in an interesting and entertaining way, and the musical numbers in this just aren't. They're half-hearted, they feel poorly constructed, and it also feels like there are big pieces of them missing. For example, after the courtroom scene with Joker's friend from the first film, Gary, there was a musical number, and it's sort of like a wedding type thing, and Gary is in that scene, but he only really appears in like 2 shots. He's never in focus, he's always at the edge of the frame, and he's extremely easy to miss. And I'm just thinking that from a filmmaking perspective, you don't get that actor, like you don't spend the time to get that real character in the scene unless he has something to do, or you want it to be very clear that he's in the scene, which to me makes me think that there's footage of that musical sequence on the cutting room floor that Gary had a larger part in, or that the musical sequence was, much different at one point, and they just sort of ended up being stuck with this footage where he was sort of off frame. And I bring this up because I think it speaks to sort of a bit of a confusion on the film's part about what it wants to be and what it really wants to convey, especially with these musical sequences. And on that note, this movie also is extremely pretentious. That's not a word that I like to throw around a lot because, those dirty normies will call really basic things pretentious just because they don't like it. This movie is pretentious. It starts off with like a Looney Tunes style cartoon that is just entirely unnecessary. The themes come through perfectly fine without that cartoon. And also, again, the entire musical aspect, while I see the point of it, is simply, I feel, striving to be something that the film is not, which is kind of what I would define as pretentious.
Not my mother, Todd.
When it comes to this film and the source material and even the prior film and the fans,
Todd
Phillips clearly does not give a shit. And that is really why I wanted to make this video. Because I'm sure it's happened before. I've never before seen a film that has a director behind the camera who so obviously loathes what he's working on and so obviously hates the fans of the source material. And even though it's probably not healthy or like cool, a part of me just like, I don't know, really loves it. I just think it's funny. Like, this guy clearly knew that people were going to hate the movie. There's like all these weird reports that he like hid in a cabin in the woods the weekend it came out and such. And if you like watch what he says during interviews, it's obvious he knew exactly what he had going on here, and I think the studio did as well. If you're terminally online like I am, you'll have read James Gunn's comments about the film, like distancing himself from it and saying like this is not a DCU film. Everybody knew that this was going to be hated, which makes me think that they made this shit on purpose to be hated. How that happened, why that happened, I don't know. Only Todd Phillips and the Warner Brothers executives know. But Todd Phillips, if nobody else, knew that the fans weren't going to like this movie. And he was right. I think maybe he was banking on critics liking it because critics also are like, fuck superhero movies. But he gambled a little wrong on that one. You can't win all the time. And furthermore, he like clearly didn't want to make the sequel. I don't think that the first film really ends in a way that feels like it's setting up a sequel. I think that story is told pretty concretely, but the first one made a ton of money and Warner Brothers obviously wanted a sequel, and so Todd Phillips made a sequel that is extremely cynical and deconstructs the character and why he would ever even need a sequel. This film doesn't really add anything new to the Joker himself. What it does is respond to commentary and criticism of the first film. So this movie is not a conversation with its predecessor, it's a conversation with the response to its predecessor, which is really interesting to me. There's an interview, I think, with like IGN or someone, I don't know, I'll find it and I'll have the text right here, right over my face, where Todd Phillips answers a question about toxic fandom and the attitude of the Joker wanting to give up that mantle. And he says, that's right, that is in the movie. But it was never about addressing toxic fandom, but it was about addressing this idea of what happens if this thing gets put upon you, like we were saying just 5 minutes ago, but it's not actually who you are. And then, what happens in the worst case scenario if you finally find love in your life, or think you do, but that person is in love with the character that you represent, not the person that you are. This is very interesting to me, because he's talking about the arc of the Joker in this film, such as it is supposed to be, but it feels to me like Todd Phillips is talking about himself and his relationship with this sequel. The sequel is this thing that's put upon him, and also the legacy and response to the first film is something which is put upon him that he doesn't want to grapple with. Which brings me now to the film totally being about toxic fandom. In both this film and in real life, Joker has fans and admirers that don't get it. As in, like, the Joker in that first film is not supposed to be the good guy. This was something that both fans and critics of the movie missed. Like, people who didn't like the film said it was glorifying violence. And people who did like the film liked it because they thought it was glorifying violence. When the entire point of that film is that the Joker is a bad guy Yes, but he is a product of specific circumstances. So while his actions are not good, while his actions should not be condoned, the film is trying to explain what leads to those bad actions and how they should be stopped or prevented or circumvented, whatever. But again, in classic fashion, most of the audience, good and bad, missed that, and the Joker became one of the literally me characters, as in toxic villainous characters who are emulated by young angry men because these characters take back a sense of agency from a society which is pushing them to the outskirts and makes that society pay for its poor treatment of those sad men on the margins. Joker is not the only character like this. Taxi Driver and Travis Bickle are obviously really big inspirations for the Joker, but he's another great one. Patrick Bateman is another good one. Lou Bloom from Nightcrawler. Again, I made an entire video about these characters that you can check out, and that is why I wanted to come back to this topic. Because I made my video saying that people are missing the point on these characters, and people got mad at me. Todd Phillips is clearly horrified with the response to the Joker, both from critics and fans, as this figure who should be exalted. And so he puts those same fans, those toxic basically incels, as Todd Phillips defines them in this film, and he pushes them through the ringer, and he just beats them over the head with the idea that you missed the entire point of the last film. This film, though, and its predecessor both focus on why violence and blind following of these cult figures are bad. The best scene in this movie is when Gary testifies against Joker and says, "Hey, what you did caused serious harm to me and other people. It's not cool, and people shouldn't think that you are cool." I think that focus on trauma was really important, and it was really interesting, and I wish that more of the film had really focused on that instead of just focusing on punishing Joker. On a similar note, when the Joker is on trial in this film, I don't really get the impression that the script is putting Joker or Arthur, or however you want to look at him, on trial. It's Todd Phillips putting himself on trial. Remember, this thing gets put upon you. That person is in love with the character that you represent, not the person that you are. Todd Phillips is trying to take his film back from the people who are loving a piece of it which isn't real, which is exactly what Arthur's character is going through in this film with Harley Quinn and with the Joker fans. This film is made in direct response to the people who loved and idolized Joker, and only exists because people misunderstood that first film. I'm not an expert, I'm not a genius, I'm not in the room, but I would hazard a guess that if the reception to Joker 1 had been different, and Warner Brothers still wanted Joker 2, Todd Phillips wouldn't have done it. I feel like this film is him trying to take back his original point in that first film. And from there, I feel like it's important just to discuss the nature of the Joker character, kind of in general, because that's what this movie is about as well. Not just Todd Phillips' Joker, but kind of the Joker mythology in general. And I just have to say that I'm somewhat biased in this, and I think that one of the reasons I liked this movie more than most people is that I hate the Joker. It's not that I hate the Joker, it's more so that I hate the approach that fans and writers have been taking to the Joker for a long time, both in comics and in films. Like, he's my least favorite Batman villain because I just don't feel that he's really that interesting, and media is constantly trying to make him more interesting than he is. Sort of the whole point of this character has always been that he's fairly one-dimensional and an agent of chaos, and it's just in more recent years as they've been trying to make him this more layered, nuanced piece of commentary about good and evil at large, and I just don't find that interesting, especially when he is divorced from Batman. I think that Joker works best when he exists in this relationship with Batman, which is why, even though The Dark Knight is like one of the main reasons the Joker now has this like weird cult following around him, that film works not only because of Ledger's performance, but also because of the great relationship the Joker has with Batman in that movie. The two are supposed to go together. So when the Joker is by himself in his own film, completely divorced from Batman, as he is in this movie, it doesn't quite work for me. Fans latch onto this character because he's simple, but then try to make him complex, and it comes off as really shallow and cringy. Like, the Joker mythology is so absurd, and the fact that people are seeing him as this vessel for their own frustrations is also extremely absurd, and this film knows that. Phillips is trying to deconstruct and break down Joker in every way that he can, and that includes, like, Joker straight up getting sexually assaulted. A lot of people have called this scene unnecessary, and, you know, maybe it is, but I think that there is a real reason to this implied assault, in that Joker is seen by men as this guy who is like reclaiming his masculinity and his purpose, and then he's put through the most demasculating thing possible. Is it tasteful? No. Is there a thematic purpose to it? I would say yes, but I also think that Todd Phillips is making a case about like what the Joker as a character was supposed to be has been absolutely corrupted, defiled, and raped, which maybe doesn't totally translate because Todd Phillips is kind of doing the same thing because he also hates the Joker and is just wanting to punish this character, but I think it still in a way kind of like fits all three different versions of criticism you can level at the mythology around the character of the Joker. Like, this movie really attacks the idea of Joker as an icon, and specifically like the imagery of him that is portrayed and latched onto by like the Sigma males. And this film is also really interested in the idea of how the Joker views himself, and therefore how people view themselves. Such as that when all you have is an imaginary image of yourself, when all you have is that delusion, and it's shattered, you end up with nothing. And that is what we see in the musical sequences, is Joker's projection of what he wants to be, or what he thinks he is, or what he thinks people want him to be. It's all fake, it's not healthy, and it's more than this disconnect from reality that is extremely toxic, not just to the Joker and Arthur, but the people around him.
When you bring me out, can you introduce me as Joker?
Joker does not deserve to be idolized. He is not cool. By the end of this film, Joker gets what he fucking deserves, which is to die alone, having accomplished nothing. The entire film, the audience expects something big, either a speech from Joker, an attack from Joker, a riot, whatever. And unlike the first movie, that never happens. And although it's unsatisfying, that's the entire point of the film. We shouldn't want something big. We shouldn't want these big bursts of violence. We shouldn't want this retribution. We should not idolize people who make it their goal to exact retribution, because they're going to claim it's on our behalf when really it's on theirs. And more importantly, it's just a fantasy. So as Alfred would say in The Dark Knight,
Some men just want to watch the world burn.
But this film says that they don't deserve a platform. Harley Quinn is also an important aspect of this film, and on the note of Harley Quinn, I have to say that I think she's a far more interesting character than the Joker. She hasn't been around nearly as long, which is why there's probably more to say with her, but unfortunately, Harley Quinn and her reputation were absolutely ruined by Suicide Squad in 2016, and I think that even if people don't remember Suicide Squad itself, they remember liking it, and they remember the idea of the Joker and Harley. If anyone was around in 2016, you're gonna remember the absolute, like, cancerous onslaught of Joker and Harley Quinn lovers and shippers who thought they had such a cool and hot relationship, when the entire point of that relationship in the source material is that it's terrible, and that the Joker's constantly mistreating and taking advantage of Harley Quinn. Between Jared Leto and Heath Ledger, though, like, the idea of the Joker as somebody reprehensible has vanished because he's portrayed as this, like, cool guy who's just off the walls, and Suicide Squad has, like, a hot girlfriend. And that's not at all what this character is supposed to be. And this film, again, is trying to sort of reclaim that relationship and portray it in a way that's closer to the source material. Although, like, this is a bit of a switch, in that instead of the Joker manipulating Harley Quinn in this film, Harley Quinn is manipulating the Joker. Again, the Joker is, he's demasculated in every possible way, even down to when Joker and Harley Quinn do the old adult smash burger activity. Joker literally has to ask Harley, like, to do it for him. Like, he doesn't know how it works. He's a virgin. Todd Phillips is trying to portray him as weak, which is, again, the opposite of how he's portrayed by Jared Leto in Suicide Squad. This film is a massive middle finger to those past portrayals of the Joker, and specifically the Joker-Harley Quinn relationship, as cool and positive, and the people who idolize him in that relationship. Not to mention, Harley, in a way, slightly builds on the whole kind of Marxist, classist commentary that was such a big part of the first film, which, big surprise, most of the people missed the point of, and that she kind of represents how the ruling class and the elites take advantage of disturbed individuals and sort of idolize them for fun. Think of how people like Ted Bundy are viewed, and even Lee Harvey Oswald, how he was used and taken advantage of by people smarter than him, or like a John Hinckley Jr. It's when the rich ruling class sort of takes these disturbed individuals and uses them to do things that they want to do, but wouldn't do themselves. And on that note, like, in a film that is so much about, like, potential class issues and exploitation and domestic violence, particularly in large urban areas, there's a really missed opportunity to use Gotham as a character in this film, especially since Gotham was such a strong character setting and presence in the previous film. This film also doesn't really have an interest in addressing like root causes of what causes a guy like Joker or providing solutions. It pays slight lip service to it, but the first film did a much better job. And as mentioned, the movie really just beats a dead horse. And the biggest waste of it is the character of Harvey Dent, who is supposed to represent the potential of Gotham, the potential of the government, the potential of social services, and then show how that can all crash and burn so easily. And in this film, he's just sort of like a generic, smarmy asshole who's mean to the Joker, but also like he's right because the Joker is a criminal, like we saw it. And then the film half-heartedly shows like his face get damaged at the end by an explosion, but it's like... it's pointless. This movie clearly doesn't care about Harvey Dent or have an interest in him, so I would have much preferred if, like, instead of getting his face slightly scarred, he just, like, got his entire head blown off because it fit into the Todd Phillips middle finger narrative of the source material. Which brings me back to the basic fact that Joker Folie is a cynical blockbuster, which doesn't care about its source material or even really about its predecessor. It cares about the fact that people misunderstood its predecessor and that people are likely going to misunderstand it. Todd Phillips is refuting his own movie and his own fans in this, and just like Joker, Phillips is kind of being dragged back in front of, or, you know, behind the camera, and like the Joker in this film, Todd Phillips seems to me to be horrified by what he created. Joker is meant to represent incels and toxic literally me fans, but instead he has been idolized by them, and so Todd Phillips, tastefully or not, is trying to punish those fans and punish that idea in this film, which, you know, logically, is going to piss off the fans. And it raises an interesting question that if you make a film which is made to be hated, and people hate it, did you not objectively make a good movie?